Leaders are readers. I didn't coin that, but I have heard that phrase throughout my leadership journey, and it is absolutely true. Well, hi, this is Mike Howard. Welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. It's been a couple weeks since I've been able to podcast. My wife and I, we've been quite busy the last couple of weeks. We were able to take a nice trip to California with some good friends of ours, and then came back and did a bit of a staycation. And then we had some house guests from another state, good friends of ours that stayed with us. So we've been a little bit busy on the social front, but now we're kind of back in the groove, and I'm able to get back to podcasting. I hope that your May is going well. A lot of things happening in the world, but just remember to stay focused, and all the things that we've talked about in this podcast about worrying. I've gotten a lot of feedback from that particular podcast about how to handle worry, how to handle stress in today's world, which is so chaotic, both at a macro and micro level. So thank you for the feedback on that. As with all of these podcasts, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button on the screen. Tell your friends and family about the podcast if you're enjoying it. And also, please pick up a copy of The Art of Ronin Leadership, Strategy, Execution, and Sustained Success. You can find it on our website and on Amazon. Also, I am just about done with the second book on this Ronin Leadership series, and it'll be more about a how-to book, but I'll get to that. I'll get to that later. So, I was thinking about what to talk about today, and it just dawned on me. I haven't really tackled the issue of reading, and you're probably saying, "Well, what does that mean?" I heard the phrase years ago that a leader is a reader, and that certainly is true. In order for you to have continuous improvement as a leader, you have to read. I found throughout my career, both when I was at CIA and certainly at Microsoft, that reading really helped me a lot in terms of teaching me more about leadership styles, also really helping me a lot in terms of my ability to think through problems, situations that other people have found themselves in and have written about. So one of the things we used to do when I was at Microsoft with our leadership team, and it wasn't just me, our leadership team did the same thing, is if one of us read a book that we thought was really great and was able to really help sharpen our leadership acumen, we would share them with each other. A lot of times I'd buy my team books that I had read because I thought, we could all benefit from it as a team. And I also gave my boss at the time copies of books so that, hopefully he would read these books. Reading is important because, number one, no matter what leadership style you hone for yourself in this journey of Ronin leadership, where you will eventually determine what kind of leader you are, and how you work best to lead your teams and to drive strategy, there's a whole universe of knowledge out there on leadership and books. Leadership is one of the most written about topics that you can find, especially in the business section of any bookstore. So certainly you have a wide variety to choose from. I'll give you sort of a walkthrough of my journey of what I was reading and why I was reading when I was at Microsoft, just to give you some ideas, right? So I remember telling all of you before, and in the book, I certainly talk a lot about how a leadership team and I first got together, and the emotional intelligence training that we went through in order to help forge ourselves as a team that could trust each other and work well in the sandbox with each other, right? And put aside petty jealousies or personality issues so that we could kind of get together and work together as a team. But one of the first books that I got for our team was one of my favorite authors, Patrick Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni has written several leadership books. He owns a company in San Francisco called The Table Group. All of his books are in the form of a fable, a story. And the story usually highlights a leader, a CEO, or some leader in an enterprise that finds himself or herself in some type of business situation where he or she doesn't quite know how to handle it, but they kind of figure it out, whether it's a team building or whether it's trying to get strategy done or what have you, and eventually winds up, becoming success. And the beauty of Lencioni's books is at the end of the book, there's a great summation of the main teaching points. And you could go to the Table Group website, which I used to do after reading his books, and he would actually provide for free some things you could print out and use as reference materials to help you as you're in your journey. The very first book I bought for our team was this one, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And for those of you who've been in the leadership game for any number of time, or period of time, I should say, this is a staple in the leadership reading realm, right? This is one of the go-tos. And why? Because what it talks about in this book are things that all leaders face when you're either forming a team or trying to put a team together that they're not working well together. And I kind of earmarked some of the main things that this book talks about is talking about I need to get my readers on because I am getting a little bit older nowadays. So I'm going to put the readers on here. Also kind of makes me look a little more intellectual. But the 5 dysfunctions that he talks about in this book are inattention to results, avoidance of accountability, lack of commitment, fear of conflict, and absence of trust. And in the book, he goes through, again, by way of a fable, he goes through how our protagonist, who's trying to put together a team, deals with all of these issues. But I found that good for me and for the team that I was forming and leading, because you marry the emotional intelligence training we did with I mentioned her name before, Mitch Shepard, who put us through this really great program where we learn to start to trust each other, break down barriers, be able to speak to each other and critique each other without it getting personal, and then marry that with the 5 dysfunctions. Because in any team environment, you're going to find one of these dysfunctions that they're going to manifest themselves. And how do you deal with it, and how you put it to rest? So this was a great book for our team to read, to get them to think about their own behaviors, get me to think about my own behaviors too, avoidance of conflict or absence of trust or whatever those issues were that we needed to deal with. And so it helps as a stepping stone, as a nice foundation, as a base for any team building efforts. So, and I've read all of Lencioni's books. The other one that I thought, and I've mentioned in my book as well, is Death by Meeting, because in addition to building teams and making sure that we trust each other and can work well with each other, our days in the business world are filled with meetings. And Lencioni wrote this book, Death by Meeting, because he wanted to get across how basically ineffective a lot of meetings were, that they were a mishmash of strategy, some strategic issues, some tactical issues, some let's go around the table and talk about what you've been doing issues, and maybe some decision making, but it's all over the board, and at the end of the day, it's not focused. And his idea was to have specific meetings for strategy and specific meetings for tactical issues. And so I gave that to my team, and we also implemented that particular methodology. So Lencioni was really something that a person that I have read a lot, that I believe in what he has to say. These books are, as you can see from the size of Five Dysfunctions, it's pretty short read. All of his books are fairly short read, but they're very practical. And like I said, for me as a leader, I knew that once I read one of these books, not only did I learn, but I could go to the Table Group website. I could pull down some materials that I could then use to start implementing, like in Death by Meeting, how do we craft our own meetings within global security? And so that's one of the go-tos for me. One that I found along the way, one of the things that those of you who know me know that I'm a stickler for productivity. I have always been of the belief that the more productive an organization is, then the more strategic it can be. So if I, Mike Howard, as Chief Security Officer, craft my day, craft my ability to work in a way that makes me more productive to get the most bang for my buck in those 8, 9, 10 hours I work, then it carves out more time for me in certain periods of the week or month to think about strategy. And my theory was always that permeates throughout your entire organization. If everybody in your organization was as productive as they could be, from the chief security officer to an investigator working a case, then everybody has the ability to carve out some time to be strategic. And you never know when the next greatest idea, the next best idea for your team is going to come from. It doesn't have to come from me or the leadership team or any people managers in an organization. It could come from individual contributors who sit down one day because they've been able to craft their day well and think about, we could do this or that better within global security. Let me run it up the flagpole and see how that works. And, sometimes it works, right? But so I was a stickler for productivity training for my team, but also different books. One of the books I ran across on my own was this one. It's called Organize for Success by Stephanie Winston. And if I can get the camera going here, you can sort of see how here's a good one. Here's a good example. If you can see here, I have underlined and marked a lot of things in this book. I read this book probably 3 or 4 times over. And the premise of the book is that Stephanie Winston went around and spoke to a lot of different leaders on how, both in the public and private sector, including my former boss, Bill Gates, on how they crafted their day and how they made themselves more productive. And it goes into everything from how they manage their calendars, how they manage their emails, what meetings to take, what meetings not to take. And there's different nuances, different techniques for a lot of different people. You'll find a lot of, for instance, folks in this book as CEOs, vice presidents, what have you, executives will only look at their email several times a day. They don't look at it constantly. They carve out specific times, 20 minutes here, 15 minutes here, to look at email. Because they know that if you get caught in the email trap, you're never going to get out of it. You'll be dealing with emails all day long. It's a discipline, and I had to discipline myself when I was still working to be able to make sure that on the calendar I put down specific times of the day when I would look at and deal with email. Otherwise, and then I would craft the rest of my day for either with meetings or strategy time or what have you. But each of the executives that they talked to had different ways of capturing ideas. Some people kept 3x5 cards. I remember there was one chief of police, I think Bill Bratton, who had been chief of both NYPD and LAPD. He used to keep cards, 2x5 cards, and when an idea came to him, he'd jot it down. Different people have uh, different ways of handling things. I think Richard Branson from Virgin has these little thought books. He's got probably hundreds of them now, where he jots down thoughts and ideas and strategies. But it's a really great book because it, as the book says, top executives and CEOs reveal the organizing principles that help them reach the top. And whether it's time management or, like I said, emails, or the multitasking myth, which it is, there's working smarter, capture books. So there's just a lot of things. And I like I said, I read this book several times over because it was eye-opening to me. And it helped. And again, it wasn't that I was going to copy exactly what a lot of these executives were doing, but it did give me an idea. For instance, I believe in the book, Gates talked about several things about how he managed his email. He set up folders, and he set up a system so that things that were not going to be priority, right, would go into different folders. And so what would be in his inbox would be the most important things. I would do the same thing. If I got emails from I would flag emails from my boss, from different various stakeholders, and of course my leadership team, and they would immediately go into my inbox. Other things would go depending on, and it takes a while as you get to know the rhythm of your business in terms of email, put them in separate folders. And then the other thing I gleaned from Bill Gates was the use of multiple monitors. Now that's kind of like standard nowadays, but when I started in Microsoft in 2002, that necessarily wasn't standard. But the idea was to be able to have you might have one monitor for email, one monitor for your internet, another monitor to do some Word documents or something. But at one point, I had 3, maybe 4 different monitors linked together on my desk, and I could also move them back and forth, and it made me quite productive. But again, a book like this was golden for me, especially as I was in my formative years at Microsoft, to get me thinking about how I do my work and the whole myth of multitasking. You can't multitask, because once you are working on something and then you hear the ding of the email or something else, and you go to focus on that, it takes you longer to get back on track to focus on what you were originally working on. So you work on one thing at a time, unless of course it's a crisis, and then you may have to juggle a few things. So that was an excellent book. Another book, which I mentioned a lot about history. I think as leaders, you should be reading a lot of biographies on leaders that you admire, and people who you have made an influence on you, either personally because you've read about them or heard about them. And for me, there were things like Martin Luther King, Abe Lincoln, people like them, and a lot of military leaders throughout history, that I love reading military history, because biographies always give you the good, bad, and the ugly on the people that are being profiled. Leaders are human beings. We, like all of us, are. They have their good points. They have their points that they can improve. They have their frailties. They have their insecurities, which was one of the things I really got a lot out of from reading biographies, are the insecurities that a lot of our leaders had. I read a couple great biographies on George Patton, the World War II leader in the U.S. Army. And he was very brash and bold, and he was obviously a great combat commander. But he had insecurities. And before battles, he'd question himself, and he'd have a few doubts. And that's great for leaders to read about, because you could say, hey, I have those insecurities too. So if someone like Patton had them, I guess it's natural. And so reading a lot of history really helps, I believe, hone and really refine your leadership acumen. There are lots of books, and I would just say again, go to the biographies of the people that you admire and read about them and find out what made them great leaders, what things, where they stumbled and were able to hopefully get back on track, and what were their methodologies to get back on track, and what were their attitudes about failure, about people not liking them. And to that end, one of my favorite books here, and this is a little thicker than a Lencioni book, as you can see here, is called Team of Rivals. And it's called The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Doris Kearns Goodwin, for those of you who don't know who she is a historian of great note. She's written many, many books on history. And I was actually able to listen to her at Microsoft. There was a program at Microsoft, I hope they still have it, it's called Microsoft Political Action Committee. And what it was you put in $5 and you would have access to speakers, a lot of political speakers from both sides of the aisle that you could listen to and hear them, their thoughts about the state of affairs in the US, state of affairs in the world. They would take questions and got to hear a lot of interesting people. Doris Kearns Goodwin was one of the folks that came to speak to us. And one of the great things about this book, if you don't know about this book, and I know a lot of you do know about this book, is that when Abe Lincoln became president, he was not necessarily his party's number one choice. His only claim to fame in politics was, I believe, as a state legislator, I believe, in Illinois. And he was a country lawyer, but he made it to the presidency. And a lot of the folks that he ran against, he came in the midst of the Civil War. So this is a president that's not very well liked by his own party. He certainly had his own doubts about his ability to lead the country, though he had also a lot of confidence as well. But what was interesting was he brought in a lot of these folks that ran against him, that talked badly about him during the campaign, and he brought them into his cabinet. Why? Because despite what they said about him, and despite what his own personal feelings might be about what they said about him, he knew that he needed their talent to help run the country during a time of crisis. Now, you talk about somebody who puts their ego in check, right? This is the greatest example, or at least one of the greatest examples, of a leader putting their ego in check for the greater good. And this whole book documents how he came to power, then how he's able to form his cabinet of people who were rivals, who at the end of the Civil War, they had respect, and in some cases were friends of his, right? Great leadership lesson to be learned here. Think about today's society. Think about our society, our government today, and how, whether it's a Republican in office or a Democrat in office, the only people they're going to put in their cabinet are people that think like them, that just are wedded to their policies, which is fine to a certain extent. But then you do not get the diversity of thought, the diversity of decision making, right? I think you would never find anyone in power today, whether it's in national politics or state and local, that would consider bringing a member of their opposition into their decision-making body because they felt that that person might be able to actually lend something to the discourse. And I've talked about discourse before. So this is a great book. I would highly encourage you to read it because it gives you some really great leadership lessons. Going back to the productivity piece, I had a lot of productivity training For my team, I still believe in it. I believe that um, not only is it great for your organization, but as an individual worker, you come in on a Monday morning after a weekend and you're inundated with emails and you've got meetings and you've got projects that you're working on, you've got deadlines to meet. Now, how do you wrap all this together? And so, one of the folks that I turned to earlier in my career at Microsoft was a woman named Laura Stack. They call her the Productivity Pro. Brought her into from Colorado, where she lives with her husband and children, to give us productivity training. I read one of her books. I liked what she had to say. I reached out to her, and she did a great job of helping us manage um, our day. And one of the books that was a go-to for me was this one, What to Do When There's Too Much to Do. Reduce tasks, increase results, and save 90 minutes a day. And so it's not so much about working harder, it's about working smarter, as the old saying goes. And so, again, going back to how you craft your day, how you prioritize. I got to the point where I didn't have to have, if I was invited to a meeting, for instance, if I had nothing to lend to that meeting other than sit there like a bump on the log because I was just invited because someone wanted to invite me, I took that off the calendar, right? I got really good at only going to the meetings where I was going to be able to contribute. Meetings that my bosses called, obviously, I would have to go to those, or meetings that really had something to do with security or risk. But other than that, I'd either delegate other meetings if I thought it was worthwhile to do so, or just forget about them, right? And little things like I used to have hour-long meetings with my direct reports, but we realized that after a period of time, I didn't need an hour, neither did they. And they had, again, they have things to do too. So the less time they're spending time with me, the more time they have to do their work. So we cut those meetings down to half an hour. I know of some executives at Microsoft that actually were successful at cutting meetings with their direct reports down to 15 minutes. I found half an hour was a sweet spot for me. But it's techniques like these, and again, the calendaring, and how you have to own that calendar. Don't let the calendar own you. Same with email, right? And all these kinds of things. So Laura writes a lot about that. There are other people that touch on that as well. But productivity reading was very, very important to me. Another one, and I can't find a copy of it right now. It's buried with some of my other books. Was Jack Welch on winning. Jack Welch is a former CEO of General Electric. Back in the days when GE was completely bloated, too many people, the processes were not conducive to smooth, efficient car making operations. They also built a lot of other things like engines and appliances as well. But at the end of the day, when Jack took over, he was able to streamline General Electric to where it became an efficient, money-making enterprise. And a big part of that was what he talked about was kind of I'm paraphrasing here, the kind of hidden stain of business, which is the inability to be direct and get to the point and not dance around issues. We've all seen it. You've seen it. I've seen it. I've been guilty of it, especially earlier in my career, where there's some sensitive topic that really should be discussed among your leadership team or whoever, and people are nuanced about it. People avoid it. They dance around it. They think that by being, well, they'll understand what I'm trying to say without me trying to say it. Welch was completely the opposite. Just get it on the table. Let's talk about it. There are going to be hurt feelings. People are going to get mad or whatever, but we need to deal with it so we can move on. His thesis was that so much wasted time in business because people can't deal with confrontation, can't deal with conflict. And that goes back to one of the five dysfunctions of a team with Lencioni. So you can see how a lot of this stuff ties together, even though they're by different authors. And so the idea of being able to engage, be direct, to make the proper decisions. And if there are hurt feelings along the way, then so be it. But we have a job to do and we need to get it done. And so that was one of the, and again, that was one of the books that I would highlight and mark. And it wasn't that I was going to, next day I'm going to be Jack Welch. It was that, okay, there are things I can learn in my role as chief security officer that I can lend to make my organization better, especially in those formative years when we're building an organization, we're building teams, we're building strategies, we're trying to get buy-in, we're trying to get budget, we're trying to figure out what our budget should be. All these kinds of things. When you just remember this, you don't have to do this alone. Besides the mentors that I had, besides other people I could talk to that give me ideas and help me through different problems. You have, as a leader, you have this resource in front of you. You have books. You have books on how to. You have books on history and biographies and productivity. You have books like Lencioni's books, which are great reads because they're stories. But those stories have a teaching point. But you have all this stuff, all this information at your fingertips. So if you don't read and you don't take the time to read, oh, I don't have time to read. Yes, you do. If you have time to watch TV, or if you have time to work out, or if you have time to do whatever, you have time to read books to help grow your leadership acumen. The other thing I would encourage you to do is what I did, is if you find a book that you really are passionate about, you love the leadership premises and the themes and the teaching points, share them with your team. Buy them for your team if necessary, but share them with your team, and then encourage your team to read on their own and share with you and the rest of the team. It became a really cool thing with my leadership team to be able to look at different books, share about them, and even talk about them. At certain times to see what we glean from them. But so that's kind of the point I want to get across today. Certainly, I think you should read The Art of Ronin Leadership as well, because I think it touches on a lot of the points that all these other books touch on. But please, leaders are readers. I didn't coin that, but I have heard that phrase throughout my leadership journey, and it is absolutely true. And I know you're busy. I know you've got a lot of things on your plate, and I know getting the job done is number one. Get it. I understand. I've been there. But when you can, carve out a few minutes in a day, or one of the things I would do is, I told you before that I would carve out at least like the afternoon, usually a Friday afternoon, try not to have meetings there, so that I could strategize. A lot of times part of that strategy was reading one of these books, right? Where I could learn, because part of that strategy time is not just sitting there formulating strategy, which is obviously important, thinking about that next and best, greatest idea for your organization, but it was also feeding your mind, feeding your soul, feeding your spirit with books, with leadership books that will help you grow as a leader, but help you to lead your teams more effectively. If you have ideas on books that you have read that you'd like to share with me and the folks that subscribe to this podcast, please do so. We love to get that kind of feedback. And I think it's important that as part of this effort here, this leadership podcast, that we help each other out. So it's not just Mike Howard telling you and waxing philosophical about the things I believe in that I'm passionate about, but also you sharing with me as well as anybody else listening the things that work for you, the resources that you have found helpful to make you a better leader. I think that would be awesome. That'd be awesome. So please do so. So that's all I have for this edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. I really appreciate you listening. I appreciate the feedback that I've received from you. I mention that all the time because this podcast would not be in existence if it wasn't for those of you who subscribe, who tell your friends and family about it, and then who provide feedback. So I appreciate that. If you also if you have ideas for topics that you want me to cover or people that you want me to talk to, well, we've got some guests lined up that I think you're going to really enjoy. But if there's somebody you'd like me to approach that you think would be great for this podcast, please again send me your ideas and thoughts, and I'll certainly look at those. Again, please pick up a copy of The Art of Ronin Leadership, either at our website or on Amazon. So that's it for now. I hope this is a Monday morning in mid-May. Hard to believe that we're almost into summer, half the year. Year is really flying by. Stay safe, stay healthy. Best to all of you and your friends and your family. And until next time, we'll be back here again with another edition of The Art of Ronin Leadership. Have a good one.